Hi, this is John Ricciutti at Mainline Public Television and Radnor Studio 21. And my guest today is Joe Krush. Joe is a World War II veteran. He was an artist, illustrator, and he was at the Nuremberg trials. His job there, as he'll explain to us, was setting the stage for what became the very famous trials at Nuremberg. Before we get to Nuremberg, were you drafted?
No, I enlisted. Drafting was coming up, and I decided that I didn't want to go into the Army. I'd rather go into the Navy. I took my portfolio down to Washington.
A portfolio of drawings?
Yes, of things
Okay.
that they would be interested in, posters and etc. Because I'd done a lot of work with RCA with posters and victory things. And they said no, they were not interested. However, the Army was requesting artists, etc., sculptors, musicians, to get in touch with them. Gave me a phone number on Governor's Island in New York City.
The Navy gave you this?
The Navy gave me this, and I came home and I thought, oh, I'll call them up. And I did, and they told me what it was, and it sounded good. It sounded, I should do something about it, and I said, fine, I signed up. And I said, when do I report? And they said, well, when the next draftees go to Fort Dix, you just go with them. And I did, and...
Well, how did you know? How did you know that the draftees were going to Fort Dix?
Oh, you always know. They
Oh, okay.
always met at the corner, and the bus was waiting, and everybody got on.
Oh, okay, okay.
And I got to Fort Dix, and the draftees kept coming in and leaving, and I kept sitting in the barracks. I think I was there for about 2 weeks. And finally, a lieutenant drove up and said, Krush? I said, yes. He said, come with me. You're going to sit with the train master because you know where you're going. And I was going to Fort Meade, and we got to Fort Meade.
Fort Meade, Maryland.
And all the other guys here. I didn't even have a suit that fit. I mean, it was terrible.
You mean a suit like a uniform?
Oh. Well, we get to Fort Meade, and I get off, and there's a young lieutenant waiting to pick me up and take me to my outfit. It's very unusual. I'm a nobody, and I'm less than a private.
You're a buck private.
I was a buck private. And I went into the 603rd Engineer Camouflage Battalion. My serial number 120-48894.
Wow.
And it was run by a young lieutenant colonel, West Pointer, real gung-ho kind of fella, and who had to put up with all the artists in the outfit. It was full of artists who later I realized who they were.
Do you recall any of them?
Well, this man was not an artist. You've all heard of Bass Shoes?
Oh, sure.
Well, Bass was in my company, and we had a violinist who had a Stradivarius violin. I mean,
With him?
No, he didn't have it with
But
him.
he did or didn't?
No, he did not.
Okay.
But he had a viola which I would borrow from him and
Oh, you played the violin?
from my own amazement. But this went on and on for
So
about
this was a whole troupe of
a
artists?
company. Yeah,
a whole troupe
company
of
of artists.
And you had no idea what you were doing there?
Well, we were training.
Oh,
We
you were
went all through basic training.
Oh, you were military training?
Oh, indeed, indeed. Reveille and pull the flag down, put the flag up, and go on long marches, and we had went out on maneuvers. Nighttime, it was pretty cold out there with one blanket, I'll tell you. But anyway, 6 months went by, and the colonel was anxious for me to go to. He said I think he insisted that I apply to OCS, which I did, and I made it. And I went into the engineer school at Fort Belvoir, along with a class of reserve engineers from Texas A&M. So I think Texas A&M is my alma mater.
Sure.
And
why not?
they were all slide rules and boots and saddles.
You too?
Not me. I had a pen. I knew which end of the pencil to sharpen, but I got through that. Went through the whole business without a gig, and came time to assign. I can remember taking my oath of office, and everybody running to the office to see where they were assigned, and I'm assigned to the engineer school at Fort Belvoir. This is unheard of. I mean, this doesn't happen. Only to me, unusual. And I was assigned to teach at the engineer school, camouflage battalion, a camouflage school, and it was quite large. And we would bring in classes every 2 weeks, anything from privates to colonels, field officers. And some of them, they were quite anxious to go because Fort Belvoir was just a hoot and a holler from Washington, D.C. on weekends.
So what were you there to teach?
Camouflage.
Really?
Yes. What to do, what not to do, and you know, don't strike a match in the middle of the field. You're a dead man because you can see a match lit a mile away. And we would put on demonstrations of how you could hide right in front of people, and it was a good course. And these men would go back to their outfits and then teach all the other men.
Sure.
But they came from all over the country.
So what happens after that?
I had a major who was head of the department. He said he was anxious to leave, and he was leaving, and did I want to go with him? Now, I was there 15 months, which is a long time in the middle of a war. And I said, yes, I would like to go with him. And he took 4 or 6 architects who were also teachers. And I never knew what happened to them until later. As a matter of fact, everything I say is conjecture, because I got to Washington, D.C., and I find out I'm in OSS. And I'm slated to go to Chongqing, China.
Did you know what OSS was at the time?
Oh, yes, Office of Strategic Services.
Oh, yeah, I know that, but did you know what it was?
Yes. I knew of it as a cloak and dagger outfit.
Right, right.
But,
and I don't think they had any real direct affiliation with the military. I think the military said they didn't exist.
As a matter of fact, for me to go from the Army to OSS had to go through the Joint Chief of Staff, which was a funny incident. I liked to skate, and my wife and I would go from Alexandria.
Were you married at the time?
Yes, I was married 6 months after we enlisted.
Okay.
We would take a bus and trolley all the way out to Chevy Chase to skate. And one day, majors, I was, I guess, a second lieutenant then. I went by Major Bonus, and he said, "Krush, your name came up today in the Joint Chief of Staff." I don't know, what have I done? But apparently that was what it was, okay to go to OSS. And
did you know Wild Bill Donovan?
no, of course I knew who he was. I never saw him.
Sure.
But
so then what? So you're OSS or Washington. What happens next?
Well, a funny story. Maybe I shouldn't repeat it.
No, go ahead. I want to hear funny stories.
I go to meet the colonel who is head of this morale operations, and I'm slated to go to Chongqing, China. He said, "Well, I have to leave you. I have to go around the world to see all my units. But when I'm back in 2 weeks, we'll take care of you." And of course, it left me 2 weeks to wander around and see what OSS was all about. And I came across a branch of OSS called Presentation. Fortunately, I took my portfolio to war, and I took my portfolio, and yes, they would like to have me. So they said, unfortunately, they didn't have a slot for me, but they would request me. And I heard nothing from them. And 2 weeks later, a secretary comes in and tells me that she has good news and bad news. And the good news was the good news was that my request to be transferred to Presentation Department was okay. And what was the bad news? Well, the bad news was the colonel was coming back today, and he was going to be late for lunch, and he's going to reach into his in basket, he's going to sign things, push it in the out basket, and quote, "If he does that, get your ass out of here and get these papers signed." That's exactly what I did, and the next day I was in Presentation. And suddenly I find myself sitting with a bunch of guys doing something UN, which I didn't know what UN was. And of course a lot of this had gone on before I got there. Then I found myself doing booklets for San Francisco. And about 2 months later, I'm given money to buy civilian clothes and I'm in a trainload of people. As a matter of fact, it was a special train of presentation people, and we went out by train 5 days. Went all the way down to El Paso, picked up the president of Mexico in his private car, and came up the coast to San Francisco. And fortunately, my training was excellent. There wasn't much I couldn't handle that they gave to me. Lettering and drawing and all kind of whatever it was in the art field. And my buddy was the head of the department who was out there, named McLaughlin, who was a designer from New York City, well known. We took over one whole large room in the Opera House. The two buildings are side by side. The City Hall and the Opera House are side by side.
In San Francisco.
In San Francisco, and all the plenary sessions were held in the Opera House, and all the other business went on in the other house. And we did anything they needed: posters, signage, passes to get in, even tickets. As a matter of fact, to give you some idea of what kind of guys I was working with, if they wanted to go to a plenary session, they would find an old ticket, and they would just change the dates on that ticket so beautifully you couldn't even see it. They could take a photograph. As a matter of fact, a very funny thing, we had one of the men who was high in our group, Sam Becker, and I was doing an album of all the delegates, and we had a picture of the Saudi Arabian delegation, and there was Ibn Saud in the middle, and these guys were so good, they took Ibn Saud's head out and put Sam Becker's face in there.
Is that right?
Yeah. Of course, that was a gag for us, but that's the kind of stuff they did beautifully.
So you played a big role in the UN, ultimately.
All of us did, making it run, actually designing the signing. I did the cover for the charter.
You did?
Yes, it was a simple leather cover. I didn't do the leather, but I designed the cover with gold stripes around it, and done in leather with a seal. And when it came time to have the thing signed, we actually drew lines in the charter where the delegates would sign their names. And after it was a fait accompli, it came back to us, this time with an armed guard and white gloves, and we erased the pencil lines under the signers' names. Interesting enough, the day before the charter was supposed to be signed, there was no Chinese copy. The printed copy had not come in, and they got a calligrapher who sat in the attic of the courthouse. It was quite a sight. He had two assistants. Here was the calligrapher on a little card table, the assistant on one side and assistant on the other, who would pass him the paper, and she would take the paper away. And we would sit up all night, and we sat up all night with beautiful paper and drew lines on it. And this man really had an eye. He'd look at the piece of paper and say, "No good," and throw it away. But the next morning, there was the whole charter in Chinese, and it was magnificent.
Really?
But fortunately, the printed version came in, and they took his copy and gave it to the Library of Congress. And then it was finished. But all the setting and all the signing, all the materials, was all OSS work. That was their job to do.
So after the UN, the piece you designed there,
Yes.
did you then go to Nuremberg?
Well, for some reason, I came home by myself. It was a kind of a singular thing. I came home, I reported into office in Washington, and they say, "Well, get ready because you're going to Nuremberg." And I got ready to go to Nuremberg, and got all my equipment, and I ended up in London, where I met with the OSS contingent from London, and we gathered all the material we thought we would need to operate a studio in Nuremberg. And London was really blown to hell. It was neatly piled by the side of the road, and I shouldn't tell you this, but I was an ice skater. I was a figure skater.
Yeah, that's fine.
And one of the things I
I'm glad
did
you're
was
telling
I
me
took
this.
my figure skates with me.
Okay, we did take those then. You did?
Well, fortunately, when I was skating at Chevy Chase in Washington, I met a lot of foreign skaters, and one of them was Wing Commander Bicknell, Wing Commander in the British RAF. His wife was a Scottish skating champion, and I had visions of being in London and visiting his wife and skating with his wife. Skating in London, the big rink was in Queens. That was a big rink. But unfortunately, Queens rink was full of coffins, empty coffins, preparation. But I did eventually meet Bicknell, and which is strange, and visited with him and went skating with Bicknell 2 or 3 times, because we were in London in over a month, I think. But eventually we got the call, and we went from London to Paris to Nuremberg, and we got to Nuremberg, and it was really trashed. Got into a German bus with a bus driver, a little man with a little Hitler mustache, with a sign that said "Nix mit der Wagenführer sprechen." And one of my English buddies said, "I'll jolly well sprechen to the Wagenführer if I want to." But we got to the Grand Hotel, which was a remaining hotel which had the whole front of it bombed out. If you arrived in Nuremberg, there was no setup for immediately going into a place to stay. They put you in the Grand Hotel until they worked out a billet for you. And this was a great surprise, and I think the United States really bent over backwards to make a good impression, because I walked into the dining room, and here was a dining room all set with silverware and linen tablecloths, and waiters with tails and white ties.
Like nothing happened.
Like nothing happened, and steak and white or light or dark beer, whatever you wanted, and
all German beer? All German beer?
Yes, yes, and Schwarze beer. But I noticed that there were a lot of foreign soldiers there. And I found that
What do you mean foreign? You mean?
Well, the Russian delegate for the
Right.
Nuremberg trials.
Right.
You had French delegation, all the different.
British and American, right?
Yes, plus American. But we were only there like 3 days. When after 3 days we had a billet assigned to us, and it was a German's house in Fürth, which was a little town outside of Nuremberg, and Fürth was untouched. And we lived right next door to Justice Jackson, the chief prosecutor. I did finally get to meet Justice Jackson at a party. He bought a violin. My story was that he bought a violin, and to introduce everybody to his violin, we went and met Justice Jackson. It was a magnificent, it was an Amati, which is quite a nice violin. And when I needed a violin, I went to the local music store and I bought a violin, and I paid $25 American for it. And the the store owner said, "And this is the only whole violin in all of Bavaria." And I think it was.
Hey, really?
And but I played it at night when we were not busy, and enjoyed it. Our job was to do anything to make the trial move smoothly. If they needed any documents reproduced, we had them reproduced somewhat. You have to realize at this time there were no Xeroxes. I don't know if there were any photocopying, there were no photocopying deals anyway.
Had been like a mimeograph?
No mimeograph, well, we didn't have it. But we would actually make copies of things. Things for the court, they would make 4 by 8 foot panels where we would copy these documents on these panels, and these panels would come up in the court, and they would be for the court to see.
And they would be used as like exhibits.
They're exhibits for the court.
Yes, to
for
use.
The prosecution. One of the architects that left with me was given, and I didn't realize this until later, was given carte blanche was made a captain, was given a driver and a jeep, and he toured Europe to find a courthouse that could be converted to handle 24 defendants, and came to Nuremberg, and I think that's why it happened. And of course, Nuremberg was the party of the Reichsparteitag day. That was a big German day, and I think they discussed it with Justice Jackson, and it was Nuremberg. And I understand OSS actually designed and had built the inside of that courthouse, and it was beautiful. We had an office in an adjoining building, and it was just a walk down the hall and looking out a window over the court. And I'd look right down on Hermann Goering and all the boys sitting there. And it's one thing that bothered me, that I didn't want to spit on them. But they looked like businessmen to me, just like...
They were all in suits except for
all
Goring.
Suited except for Goring, who had on a pearl gray suit, a beautiful suit. Just looked like businessmen. And of course, I didn't have much time to walk around and look out windows. But basically, that was the only way I could see the court in operation. We couldn't get into the court itself.
Did you ever see the, and I'm looking at you, and you kind of like remind me of the movie, the Judgment at Nuremberg?
Yes,
and
I
I'm
did.
Looking at you and I'm thinking Spencer Tracy.
Well, I don't know, because I didn't see any of these guys operating.
But if you saw the movie, you would say, well, that's not really how the courthouse looked inside.
Well, to me, it sort of looked like it, I think.
Did it really?
Yeah.
Okay, so they did
But
a good job.
It was, but the courtroom was crowded. You have the 24 defendants, 24 lawyers, you have 9 judges, all of their assistants, the prosecution, and you have the press, you have the instant translation people. They built a little balcony, took out a wall, built a balcony for personages, but there was not room in that room for anybody but those people invited. You just couldn't get into it.
And I don't know this, so I'm going to ask you. Did each German defendant have their own lawyer?
That I don't know. That I don't know. But I know Goering was up to defending the whole group at one time. I know. Which he, I was told, did very well and put Justice Jackson to work.
Really?
Yeah. Goering did the defending, and there were lawyers in front of all of the defendants, long line of lawyers, so that they were all working on it. But not, there were some who got away. Others were sentenced to prison, lifetime. Others were sentenced 10 years, and some were hung.
How long were you there?
I guess I was there 6 months. And it was fascinating because OSS went out of business the 30th of November, and we were nothing. There were a whole bunch of men who had no battle experience, no battle points, nothing to get home. Except, what I didn't realize, we had orders that said at the final report to Washington, D.C., which was the saving grace. I almost found myself head of the port at Le Havre, but for my knowing my orders which said report to Washington, D.C.
So what did you do after the war?
I was given a job at the State Department, and I was at the State Department. My life was, being an officer at Fort Belvoir meant that you could live off the post, and my wife and I lived off the post, and it continued in OSS also. But after OSS, we continued to live in Alexandria, Virginia for about 3 months, where I did my first book. And,
an illustration book.
A book I illustrated called Windwagon Smith and Other Yarns by Wilbur Schramm. But we were illustrators. We were anxious to get back into the field because there were other people who didn't go to war, who were busy turning things out. And one thing I did, which was unusual, I knew some photographers from OSS. I had them make for myself and my wife, each of us, a separate little photographic copy of our work.
Your wife is an illustrator too?
Yeah, my wife is. We met in art school first
Okay.
day, and I sent those to all the publishers in New York City.
Mm.
And as a matter of fact, one of them came up several years later.
You did wonderful illustrations of
Well,
Nuremberg.
they were
Wonderful.
casual, only when we had the time. And I think you'll find that most of my sketches were very quick pencils, which I did later, which I inked
You
in.
did from memory.
Yeah, well, I had the pencil sketches very quickly, and then I, from memory, did it. I have a good memory, so.
I know you have a very good memory. Can I graciously ask you how old you are?
In 1 month, I'm going to be 99 years old.
God bless you.
How do you think I got here? I've outlived my parents by 28 years.
Hmm.
Hardworking. I come from a generation that was taught how to cut cardboard to cover the holes in your shoes, and it's true. But my mother said there was nothing wrong with the top of your shoes, and there was polish, and we polished them. Your shoes looked very normal, but they had holes in the bottom.
Do you still play the violin?
No, I can't get it under my chin.
Okay. Are you still and you're still an illustrator?
I still teach.
You teach?
Yeah, I teach.
You teach
At
where?
Mainline School Night. I've been teaching now
Oh,
17 years.
There's a shout out for Mainline School Night.
Yes,
Teaching illustration.
yes. And the class is a wonderful class. But they're a marvelous group of people. It's funny, teaching, some of these people are very, very talented. Some really have had experience painting. Some of them don't know which end of the pencil to sharpen. But the one thing I stress is that when you pick up the pencil, it's second nature. You don't make a point of it. You're going to do a drawing. You just pick the pencil up and you do it. And it all starts here, and it runs down your arm, and it comes out here, and it does it. The other thing is, I say, I can't teach you to draw, but I can help teach you to see. If you can't see it, you can't draw it. And that's the truth. Even those people who draw well have to think about seeing, if they see it.
Did those events at Nuremberg impact your life?
I think so. I think so. Just seeing the people.
Joe, can you tell me about your airplanes?
Oh yes, I've built model airplanes all my life. I started when I was
Ones with motors in them?
rubber bands.
Rubber bands?
And some electric, and one of the sponsors of, one of the original members of the group that flies in Valley Forge Park,
Oh, sure.
which is now over 60 years old, I think.
Sure.
And,
I know of it.
But I built my first model when I was 10 years old.
Well, you've been a tremendous guest. And you're
Thank you very much
you're
for
a pleasure
having
to
me.
the main line, and
Thank you.
I really enjoyed having you with Joe Krush, illustrator, participant of the Nuremberg trials, illustrator for the seal of the United Nations, and terrific mainline resident. This is John Ricciutti from Radnor Studio 21.